Shabbat Shalom. It's so nice to be with you tonight. It's a beautiful night. It's so nice out. It's the Erev Pesach, and we are delighted to be with all of you tonight. We have a special guest. Rabbi Shoshana Friedman will be with us. It's just a delight. Speaks with great wisdom and passion, and we'll be able to hear her a little bit later in the service. I'll be joined leading the service tonight. Sorry, that didn't come out right. As usual, by Molly May, our cantor soloist, and Don McGahan, our wonderful accompanist, and Olivia Tucker, who keeps us all online. So Shabbat Shalom to everyone. We will begin with Ozi v'Zimrat Yah. It comes from the book of Exodus. We're about to celebrate Pesach. It's a reminder that God is with us and God will be our salvation.
Bringing in Shabbat with light, our candle blessings, which are found on page 2. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Shabbat.
Shabbat Shalom. And let us, would you please join me as we welcome the Shabbat angels in our midst. Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Asharet, Malachei Elyon, Mimelech Malchei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Bochem L'Shalom, Malachei HaShalom, Malachei Elyon, Mimelech Malchei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Baruchuni l'shalom, Malachei HaShalom, Malachei Elyon, Mimelech Malchei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. אתכם לשלום, מלאכי השלום, מלאכי עליון, ממלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא, הקדוש ברוך הוא.
The Psalms of Kabbalat Shabbat, with their beautiful references to the earth, begin this evening on page 13 with the second Psalm, Psalm 96, and we'll sing Yismechu Hashamayim, the heavens rejoice. Yismechu Hashamayim, v'tagel haaretz, yiram hayam, u'melo'ot. Yismechu Hashamayim, v'tagel haaretz, yiram hayam, u'melo'ot. Yamamai, השמיים ותגל הארץ ירם הים ומלואו ישמחו השמיים ותגל הארץ ירם הים ומלואו יממה ending of Psalm 29, Adonai Os. Adonai Os le'amo yitin, Adonai yevarech et amo. Adonai Os le'amo yitin, Adonai yevarech et amo. We greet the beauty of Shabbat like we greet a beautiful bride with Lecha Dodi. לך ובצולה תוך אמוני עם סגולה בואי חלה בואי חלה לך דודי לקראת כלה פני שבת נקבלה לך דודי לקראת כלה פני שבת נקבלה.
Such a beautiful welcome to Shabbat. Now we have an opportunity to say hello to one another. I'd like to do that in the chat. Maybe drop us a line, tell us where you're coming from if you're not coming from Pittsburgh. As we're doing that, I'd like to call our attention to Carolyn Turner's box. Carolyn is wearing red glasses there. And, it was her birthday this week, and so we want to wish you a happy birthday, Carolyn, and wish you a year of joy and growth and being outside and being around people, and hope to get to see you in the building soon.
Oh, sure.
If you'd like to wish,
Not a problem. Yeah, all
if
the
you'd
vegetables are fine.
like
Thanks a lot,
to mute, unless you're going to unmute and wish Carolyn a happy birthday. I invite you to do that. Wish Carolyn a happy birthday. It's a beautiful day. It's a beautiful season. Your birthday's right on the eve of Pesach, and we hope you feel that freedom and that
Carolyn.
energy.
Have a happy birthday, Caroline.
Shabbat shalom,
Happy
everyone.
birthday,
Happy birthday,
Caroline.
Caroline.
Shalom, Caroline.
Karen
you.
Green,
Shabbat
good
shalom.
seeing you.
Shabbat shalom,
Shabbat
Henry.
shalom.
Nice seeing you,
Tim,
Jay. Nice seeing you, Tom.
Marcy,
Shabbat shalom.
hello.
Yes, Rabbi Sharon.
Welcome, Marcy.
Shabbat
How you doing?
shalom.
How you doing, Molly?
Molly
Shabbat
May,
shalom,
Molly, Shabbat shalom, Olivia
everybody.
Tucker,
John
and
Spear.
Shabbat shalom, our guest
How are you, John?
rabbi.
Hey, I
Shabbat shalom,
talked to
Terry.
your buddy today.
Yes.
How you doing, Rabbi?
Yeah.
You have a birthday wish that you'd like to share with Carolyn. Wish her health, adventure, peace,
Both COVID shots.
2 COVID shots.
Have a nice one, Dawn.
Hi, Margie. Shabbat shalom.
Thank you.
And
Shabbat shalom to
Caroline.
you.
We're going to have an
Shalom,
opportunity
Marjorie.
later to wish one another Shabbat Shalom again. But we'll turn now to Mizmor Shir on page 22, Psalm for Shabbat.
מזמור שיר ליום השבת, מזמור שיר ליום השבת, טוב להודות לאדוני ולזמר לשמך עליון, להגיד בבוקר חסדך ואמונתך בלילות. Ali asor, ali naven, ali higayon bechinon, להגיד בבוקר חסדך, ואמונתך בלילות. Ali asor, ali naven, ali higayon bechinon.
Tzadik atamar yifrach ke'erez balvanon yizkeh shetulim beveit Adonai bechatzrot Eloheinu yafrichu od yanuvun beseva
Together we rise in body or in spirit for the call to worship, the Baruch Hu, on page 28.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Leolam Vaed.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Leolam Vaed.
This is one of the several readings that we'll be sharing tonight that is in a collection by Rabbi Shoshana Friedman, who is our guest tonight. The theme is all on the environment and our connection with it, our responsibilities to it. So we'll begin with this one, the spirit of creation. This is the day that God has made.
Let us rejoice in the opportunity to fill it with justice.
The Bible says we were created in the image of God.
So let us strive to act as God would.
Beautiful is the mind of God, filled with truth, love, and compassion.
Let us realize the truth of our actions, love our global neighbors, and change our ways out of compassion for the defenseless and unrepresented.
This is the day that God has made.
Let us fill it with justice.
Continuing now on page 33. As you taught Torah to those whose names I bear, teach me Torah too. Its mystery beckons, yet I struggle with its truth. You meant Torah for me. Did you mean the struggle for me too? Don't let me struggle alone. Help me to understand, to be wise, to listen, to know. Lead me into the mystery. Baruch atah Adonai ohev amo Yisrael.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמת.
Well, on Erev Pesach and Shabbat HaGadol, we are looking towards our redemption. We're looking towards our release from slavery and oppression, from our narrow places into wider places of opportunities for growth. And when we do that, we remember that there's still 40 years of wandering on the other side. It's a process. the process that takes us from slaves to being our own people, from degradation to exaltation. And we're going to read all that arc in our Seders tomorrow night and on Sunday night if we have 2 Sedarim. So we think of that all that energy that's going into matzah balls and brisket and all those things that you're making. And we think about the reason for that, and that is to tell the story and to remind ourselves that we too were in Egypt and we're coming out. We're coming into the wilderness. Micha Mocha, page 40.
Dayenu, our nighttime prayer, asking for protection and shelter. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom v'hamidenu shomreinu lechaim. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom v'hamidenu shomreinu lechaim. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom v'hamidenu shomreinu lechaim. Ushmor tzitenu uvoenu lechaim uleshalom me'ata ve'ad olam. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom v'hamidenu shomreinu lechaim. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom v'hamidenu shomreinu lechaim. Baruch atah Adonai הפורש סוכת שלום עלינו ועל כל עמו ישראל ועל ירושלים.
And turning the page, we continue with Vishamru. Vishamru b'nei Yisrael et HaShabbat Nasot et HaShabbat Lidorotam berit olam Beni uvein b'nei Yisrael oti leolam leolam Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et hashamayim ve'et haaretz uvayom hashavi shavat vayinafash.
Tefillah begins with the meditation on page 46, and continues through page 52, after which we will pray silently with our own personal prayers. And I invite you once again to rise in body or spirit. Adonai sifatai tiftach ufi yagid tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu ve'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, ve'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, ve'Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor ve'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, ve'Koneh HaKol, וזוכר חסדי אבות ואימהות, ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה, מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן. ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם בעזרת שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי הכל אתה רב להושיע, משיב הרוח מוריד הגשם. מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיי הכל ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ברופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות, ומי דומה לך, מלך ממית ומחיה, ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה להחיות הכל. ברוך אתה אדוני, מחיי הכל. אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום יהללוך סלה. ברוך אתה אדוני, האל הקדוש.
Prayer for the earth. Ribono shel olam, Osev Bereshit, Master of the universe, Creator of all. May it be your will to bless with compassion your creation. Please, God, bless the sacred earth, from the ant to the whale, from the giant redwoods to the bacteria, from the sand at the edge of the sea to the mountains, rivers, and streams, from each one of us to all humanity. All that exists in this world, we ask from the depths of our hearts, El Na, please, O God, bless it all. Please, O God, please heal it all. Tzur Kol HaOlamim, Rock of all worlds, please place in our hearts understanding of the impact of our actions upon your creation. Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu, El Na, God of our ancestors, O God, please help us. Renew within us courage and strength to do your will with a full heart. Help us to heal with wisdom your earth. Go'aleinu Matzilenu, our Savior, our Redeemer, teach us to live with each other, with love and with peace, in compassion and in loving kindness. Baruch atah Adonai oseh niflaot uvorei et hakol. Blessed are you, Adonai, doer of wonders and creator of all. And it's to this God that we ask for healing, healing of body, healing of spirit, for those who are sick, who are lonely, who are frightened, who are alone. Healing of body, healing of spirit. We have a very long list. I invite you to add names that may not be on this list already. And even we have all those named on my sheet and the ones you add, there's so many others throughout the world whose names we don't know, who are in need of healing on this Shabbat, and reach our hearts out to them as well. We hold in our hearts for healing Julie Arnheim, Martha Berg, Millard Balloon, Howard Bregman, Alfred Brown, Brenda Buch, Olivia Burton, Frank Carl, Christine Danchik, Hinda Sarabat Chana Pearl, Sandy Davis, Paula de Reamer, Hazan Natanya Bat Chaim Vachana, Debbie Duncan, Jacob Eisenfeld, Faye Fishman, Martin Glock, Harvey Goldstein, John Gordy, Marsha Gross, Piers Haggard, Donovan Hughes, Kathy James, Naum Kaplan, Lori Kimball, Lee Kramer, Mary Litzel, Judith Levison, Ann Mallinger, Michael N. Marcus, Dorothy Pavlik, Alex Pimpinella, Lev Podorovsky, Thomas Reich, Ann Kovalan Santoni, Chava Bela Batsara, John Shear, John Spear, Jean Strasburger III, Jackie Student, Deborah Wolfslayer, Howard Weiss, Joan Weiss, Claudius and Maxine Willis, Doreen Zisla. Just a minute. Caitlin Schutz, Brian Reuter, Sheila Grant, Steve Cravache, Nancy, Gideon Cravache, Valerie Kennedy, Deborah Fish, Joel Berg, Joy Gray, Betty Gray, Helen Goodman, Tanya Palmer, Les Palmer, Ira Altschuler, Sam Spitz. Sing together, Misha Berach, Prayer for Healing.
Misha Berach Avotenu Mekor HaBracha Leimotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Misha Berach Imotenu Mekor HaBracha L'Avotenu. Bless those in need of healing with renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
Shalom, everyone. I would love to introduce our guest speaker for this evening. Rabbi Shoshana Friedman is a writer, mother, activist, and song leader in Boston. She serves as the director of professional development at Hebrew College and as a rabbinic advisor and ambassador for Dayenu, a Jewish call to climate action. Her song, The Tide is Rising, which we'll close our evening with tonight later, which she co-wrote with her husband, Yotam Schachter, has spread as an anthem in the climate movement. As we celebrate our Passover theme, spring from our narrow places, enjoying the spring, making our small exoduses into this freedom of the change in season, we are reminded of our Jewish responsibility to protect that environment, which we love so dearly. And so we invite Rabbi Shoshana Friedman to share with us an incredible way to be involved with the global work of climate justice.
Thank you, Olivia. Shabbat Shalom, everybody, and early Chag Sameach. It's so wonderful to be here with you. I am zooming in from my home in Boston, Massachusetts, where my sweet 3-year-old is playing downstairs with my husband, in case you hear some background noise. I want to begin by thanking each of you for being here. We all have our own journeys, intellectual, emotional, spiritual, and action-oriented, when it comes to awakening to the climate crisis. Climate change is far from an easy topic, and it's very natural for a lot of feelings to come up. So I invite you to take a moment. If you're comfortable doing so, you can close your eyes and just check in with yourself and with your body, knowing that we're about to talk about climate change and climate action. What comes up for you? Just notice. Could be fear or grief, trepidation, maybe excitement or relief, numbness or despair, or something else. Whatever comes up, send compassion to all of those emotions. Thank you. Our work for climate justice has to start there, in our own bodies and in our own hearts. Pesach is practically upon us, and its very story speaks powerfully to our society right now. As the plagues worsen in Egypt, an empire determined to hold on to business as usual is plunged into chaos. Food supplies are disrupted, new and strange diseases emerge, a darkness descends so that neighbors cannot see one another. And the firstborn of all families, including vulnerable innocent children of Egypt, die as a result. As Jews, we traditionally see ourselves as the Israelites in the Exodus story. Of course, why wouldn't we? But as radical as this may sound, and as difficult as it may be to hear, as 21st century Americans, we are much more like the Egyptians, implicated in a global oppressive economic system that is destroying land and animals, human beings, including children alike, in its quest for material wealth for those in power. But unlike the Israelites, we don't have an option to geographically leave the global economy. We're a part of it. Instead, we have to change the system while we are in it, seeing modern-day plagues as symptoms of the sickness. But how do we summon the courage to even attempt such a huge task? So I want us to look in the Torah for some inspiration, this time at another instance of an unsustainable civilization, the generation before the flood. The Torah tells us that Noah was a tzaddik, a righteous man. He was the only tamim, pure, blameless person living in his whole generation, and that he walked with God. But of course, if you know the Noah story closely, Noah says not one word of protest when God tells him of God's plan to destroy all of life. Not one word. The Kedushat Levi, an 18th century Hasidic master, implies a question. He says, how can we call Noah a tzaddik when he did nothing to try to prevent the flood? And the Kedushat Levi answers. He says, there is a kind of tzaddik who serves God, but who is so lowly in their own eyes that they think to themselves, who am I to pray for a decree to be reversed? And so they don't pray. Now, even though Noah was a great and blameless tzaddik, says the Kedushat Levi, he was too small in his own eyes. He did not have faith in his own power to try to annul the decree of the flood. So Noah may have been a tzaddik, but he was not righteous enough to resist God's decree. Now let's turn to another very familiar biblical character, one that I named my son after, Abraham. As with Noah, God confides in Abraham that God plans to destroy something. At this time, it's 2 cities, Sodom and Gomorrah. But unlike Noah, Abraham speaks up. He asks God to save the cities for the sake of any righteous left among them. A 13th century mystical text imagines a dialogue between God and Noah and then compares Noah to Abraham. The Zohar Chadash says, when Noah came out of the ark, he saw that the world was completely destroyed. And he began crying, and he said, God, how could you have done this? Why did you destroy your world? And God replies, now you ask me? But when I said all flesh will end, you just went into the house of study and didn't do anything to fix that generation of yours. In contrast, the Zohar Chadash continues, when God told Abraham that God would destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham stood before God and tried to save the people of the cities. It is easy for us to be like Noah, to turn away, to try to save only ourselves, because it is so difficult to face the truth of what is in front of us. Yet the fact remains that without massive change, we are hurtling towards a world in which much of the earth will become uninhabitable, where our children and grandchildren may not have enough food to eat, water to drink, clean air to breathe, and where many major cities will be underwater and countless species extinct or endangered. Understandably, for the human psyche, this kind of destruction is too much to take. We are actually hardwired not to be able to conceive of it. And so to get through our daily lives and to function, we dissociate, we turn away, we distract ourselves, we follow basic instructions, we become like Noah, and we don't speak up. Yet all around the world, millions of people have been mobilizing to face the climate crisis head-on, despite the overwhelming odds against us. Remember that Sodom and Gomorrah, of course, were destroyed. Despite Abraham's efforts, they were. And their story is a somber reminder that we do not know the outcome of our efforts over these next 10 crucial years, this narrow window that we have to slow and avert runaway climate change. But, and if nothing else, this is a point I want you to go home with tonight, or to stay home with tonight. Our tradition comes down very clearly. Abraham is a great tzaddik. All of the ancient rabbis say so. He is much greater than Noah because he protested the decree of destruction. Our tradition calls us to emulate Abraham. Regardless of the odds, we are asked to speak up and act, to be the kind of tzaddik both individually and collectively, who is big enough in our own eyes to fight like hell for the continuation of life, no matter the odds. So, Dayenu, a Jewish call to climate action, was founded to help us move from emulating Noah's silence as a Jewish community to emulating Abraham's chutzpah. And of course, there have been amazing Jewish organizations working in the Jewish environmental space for years, but not yet has there been one specifically focused on political action and spiritual adaptation to the climate crisis. Dayenu is here to support us in being people who see the devastating truth of what is happening, people who don't look away, but people who build power and take strategic action to change the system that is leading us to the brink, no matter the odds. So I'm going to tell you a bit more specifically about Dayenu, and then I'll end with an invitation for how Rodef Shalom might choose to get involved, which I really hope you will. Dayenu has a double meaning. Dayenu, we have had enough of inadequate responses to the climate crisis. We've had enough of inadequate political responses, and we've had enough of the focus on individual consumer choices. We have had enough with the destruction of our world, enough and more. And Dayenu, we have enough. We have what it takes to respond to this crisis with bold political action and spiritual audacity. Especially tonight, we remember what it was like to be slaves in Egypt. And our commitment, therefore, to climate action is grounded in a commitment to social equity. Dayenu, as well as the rest of the climate movement and the world, now understands that the impact of the climate crisis rests disproportionately on those who have been historically marginalized, those who have contributed least to the problem. People in the global south, in poverty, in vulnerable low-lying areas, those who experience systemic racism and other kinds of bigotry. And like the pandemic that we're living through, climate change is a force multiplier. It exacerbates these historical inequities, even as it impacts everyone. In order to mitigate the most devastating impacts of climate change, we need to face this justice lens square and approach all our solutions with that lens. We also need to take action on a systemic level. And this is Dayenu's focus. Because while personal practices like reducing meat consumption and communal practices like greening our institutions are important, even if every single person and institution significantly lowered their carbon footprint, we would not even come close to avoiding the most catastrophic impacts of climate change. For that, we need strong systemic change. So what do we mean by that, systemic change? We mean cutting demand for fossil fuels, cutting supply for fossil fuels, keeping the coal, oil, and gas underground where it belongs. We mean systemic change that implements a just transition for those working in the fossil fuel industry and those out of work due to COVID-19. We mean creating millions of living wage clean energy jobs. We mean investing in the communities hardest hit by the pandemic and systemic racism and investing there instead of investing in new fossil fuel infrastructure and this destructive business as usual. And of course, systemic change means changing our agriculture and food systems, protecting and reforesting wilderness, and challenging misinformation campaigns. So this is the work of an entire movement, not just one organization. And so I'm going to zoom in even a little bit closer on Dayenu and screen share for a moment. Okay. So Dayenu launched in the spring of 2020, believe it or not, right as the pandemic was hitting the United States. It's a movement-building organization to foster a Jewish community that is confronting the climate crisis in partnership with other communities, with spiritual integrity and bold political action. Our first campaign was calling on presidential candidates to pass a just green recovery from the pandemic, to recognize that we are facing multiple crises, the pandemic, a struggling economy, a history of racial injustice, and climate devastation. And we wanted our serious presidential candidates to speak to that. Then we ran the Chutzpah 2020 Get Out the Vote campaign, and we mobilized more than 800 volunteers who reached out to over 800,000 voters who were identified as concerned about climate change. These voters were in key states. We increased voter turnout among those concerned about climate change. And you can see some of these lovely volunteers on that campaign right in this picture. We envision a just, livable, and sustainable world for all people, for all generations to come. We know the odds of that are vanishingly slim, but we will emulate Abraham and fight for it nonetheless. To make that vision real, we know we need to reach net zero carbon emissions and 100% clean energy in this country well before 2050. We need to do that while building an equitable and just clean energy economy. And doing that is going to require huge political and economic change this decade. So we're going to do this in 4 ways. We organize and empower Jewish individuals, communities, and institutions to support critical federal and state climate policies. And we have a current campaign that I will speak about right at the end of my talk. Right now, we're focused on the opportunity that this president and Congress has to put people back to work while investing in clean energy. We also work to mobilize the American Jewish community to act during key political and cultural moments. We engage with candidates and elections to change the political landscape and change what is possible. And we lead a multi-year campaign to end financial backing for the fossil fuel industry, because sometimes policy is too slow, but we can cut off the industry from building new fossil fuel infrastructure by stopping the lending and the insuring of those projects. How do we do this? We form Dayenu circles. Dayenu circles are the organizing structure of Dayenu. That is where the power lies. We don't have teams of paid lobbyists who are doing this work. We have the Jewish American community. We know that real sustained change comes from the ground up. So a Dayenu circle is a small group of people working together on climate action. They can be as small as 3 people and as big as is a functional group to work with. They're based in congregations, on college campuses, JCCs, youth groups, neighborhoods, or just a group of friends. We actually have, it says 77, I believe we have now well over 80 Dayenu circles across 22 states in DC, plus DC and Canada, that have either started or in some stage of creation. And this organization, Dayenu, just launched less than a year ago, so it's tremendously exciting. When you start a Dayenu circle, you get a lot of support. First of all, you're part of this national organization. And so right away, you are building power instead of just working on your own. You get curated strategic campaigns for bold climate action, like the Just Green Recovery campaign, Chutzpah 2020, our Climate Chutzpah district meetings, some of which are all ongoing. You can also work on local and state campaigns, which are incredibly important because that's often where the most impactful climate policy can happen if things are stalled at the federal level. You get organizing toolkits and resources. You get trainings and briefings like how to phone bank and text bank, how to organize a district meeting, how to ramp up a campaign and put more pressure on an elected official or a corporation, whoever the target is of the campaign, and how to partner effectively with local climate justice groups. And of course, there's relationships, networking, and movement building within the Jewish climate world, but also beyond. And you get coaching and support, one-to-ones with our paid organizers at Dayenu, with me, and with other rabbinical student interns at Dayenu. I'm going to stop screen share. So this is an all hands on deck moment in human history. We are at a serious crossroads. It's a time of incredible urgency and hope. The next 10 years are critical. We have this narrow chance to avoid the most devastating impacts of climate change. We are already on track for a lot of devastating impacts. And so right now we are fighting for that to be less bad than it could be. And there is a really big difference between as bad as it could be and as bad as it already is definitely going to be. Thank God there is a diverse movement of people fighting for climate justice. There are faith groups, Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities, young people, but every part of the diverse American community has to fully show up, including the Jewish community. While we're only 2% of the population, we know we have a strong voice in American society and politics. It turns out, as you probably know, that this very week, Pittsburgh is going to be in the spotlight. Reuters reports that President Joe Biden is expected to travel to Pittsburgh on March 31st to unveil his multi-trillion-dollar plan to rebuild America's infrastructure. He's expected to push for a Build Back Better plan, could have a price tag as high as $4 trillion to pay for traditional roads and bridges, but also tackle climate change and domestic policy issues like income inequality. Dayenu very much hopes that the Jewish community of Pittsburgh will join us and join the momentum of our organization and the national and international climate movement. We have to join together with communities across the country to meet this crisis with spiritual audacity and bold action. After the holiday, I hope that you will individually and as a congregation get involved with Dayenu. So I have a couple of very specific invitations. The first is simply to sign up. at the Dayenu website, and you'll receive the action emails. The second, and this is a fun one, so this Pesach, the season of liberation and renewal, in an incredible timing, Congress is going to take up legislation that will address the long-term economic impacts of the pandemic. If we raise our collective voices, then the legislation actually has the potential to be the largest investment in clean energy and transportation in US history. So Dayenu has created a calling campaign where we're hoping that thousands of Jews throughout the country are going to join us in calling our federal representatives, I'm putting the link here, senators and congressional representatives, with a great phone script that includes a chorus of the Dayenu song, if you would like. No pressure to sing, but it's very fun. And we made it very, very easy. So when you go to this link, you could just put in your information and then your own phone makes the calls for you. I did it, I found it fun and fulfilling, and it would be wonderful to have folks from Pennsylvania doing it as well. And the invitation number 3 is really the big ask, and it's where the power really comes in, which is for Rodef Shalom to consider starting a Dayenu circle. And if you are interested in that and speaking more about it and finding others in the community who you might want to start one with, then please speak with Rabbi Henry after Chag. And as you get involved, hopefully with Dayenu, please keep an ear out for our spiritual adaptation work. We understand that the climate crisis is, of course, a crisis of physics and of ecology, but for humanity, it's also a spiritual and emotional and psychological crisis. So we're piloting a newly created workshop that we're calling Confronting the Climate Crisis and Cultivating Spiritual Courage. We're doing it in 10 Jewish communities around the country this spring, and eventually it will be made available to congregations around the country. Let's emulate Abraham together. We have what it takes to meet this moment. Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach.
Sameach, thank you. I remember about a year ago when the pandemic was, when it was just announced that it was a global pandemic, and a lot of what I was thinking at the time was how suddenly I felt so interestingly, as it turns out, so connected to the rest of the world, and just really understanding like what happened in China has an impact on what happens here and what happens all around the globe, and it felt like the world was really getting smaller, and then we got more isolated from each other, and I don't know if we have kept up that feeling of connection. So thank you for reminding us about how everything is connected with equity and climate and our systems. I appreciate, and our Jewish texts and our Jewish traditions and values. Thank you so much for sharing with us tonight. And I am interested in hearing from people who might want to work on might want to work on this project with Dayenu, and tomorrow we'll be hearing from some people locally, because there's just so much that we can do. And you know what, we're about to turn to Aleinu, which means it is upon us. So it is upon us to take all these words, prayers, the thoughts that we've heard tonight, and to make them into action. It's upon us. Aleinu on page 282.
And we rise once again in body or spirit. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד.
Just a moment, we'll turn to Kaddish, which is on page 294. this morning I had a email correspondence with the mother of Daniel Plout. Daniel's Shloshim ends today. Daniel was a friend of Asher's, my younger son, best friends from kindergarten through 5th grade. And I found a photo of the two of them together, and I sent it to her, and had a quick correspondence. And I asked her, what can I do for you today? And she said, honor Daniel's memory. And I said, we can do that. So we honor Daniel Plout's memory, also honor the memories of all those whose lives touched ours, our friends and family. That's what we do when we say Kaddish, when we read this list, we honor the lives of these people. If you have additional names you'd like to add to the list, please put it in the chat. This week we honor the lives of Charles Battaglini, Darnell Campbell Jr., Barbara Dahlberg, Dr. Ed Diamond Jr., Joan Jacobs, Kenneth Karsh, Marion Kessler, Howard Lederer, Joy F. Moss, Daniel Plout, Stacy Zizek Robinson, Eileen Udy, Liv Zane, Elgin Baylor, and George Siegel. This week we also mark the yahrzeit of Milt Fine, Joan P. Goldenberg, Sylvia Horn, Janet Krieger, Mimi Lerner, Fanny R. Miller, Paula Oringer, Emily P. Popkin, Ivan M. Popkin, B. Schaefer, Elaine G. Tavel, Erwin Turner, Harry Ziff, Betty Beals, Jean Robinson. Zichanam Livracha, may all their memories be for blessing. If you'd like to unmute, we'll hear one another. And the responses are in Kaddish. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah. Yamad yivrach v'yamlich malchutei. V'chayechon v'yonechon. V'chayei t'chol beit Yisrael. Hagala v'zman karim v'imru amen. Yehei shmei rabbah. Yitzbarach,
Yishtabach, Yipa'ak, Shomam Yitnaseh, Yitadar, Yitaleh, Yitalal, Shmei Dekudesha B'dichu,
Leila,
Kata V'shirata, Kata V'nechemata, Iran Ba'alma B'yidu, Amen.
Shlama
Rabba Mishmaya,
Chayim Aleinu Kol
Yisrael,
Amen.
Amen.
Oseh Shalom,
Shalom Bimromav.
Yaseh
Shalom. Aleinu v'al Yisrael, v'kol b'nei Adam v'yidu. Amen. Shalom bimromav uyaseh
shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimeru. Amen.
Hi, Olivia again to share some announcements for our week to come, followed by a report from Karen Breen from our board, and our closing song from Rabbi Shoshana, The Tide is Rising. All of these Zoom links and more can be found in your Shalomogram on Monday mornings, the service emails, and on Friday morning. And any questions, you can message me, Tucker at rodfshalom.org. We'll get you set up. Tomorrow morning at the normal time, 10:30, we are joined by Tree Pittsburgh, talking about trees, social justice, and strong, resilient communities. Michael Zimmerman and Justin Berk from Tree Pittsburgh, looking how we can work locally with people already engaged in this work, bringing our energy to the project, and thinking about how Pittsburgh is impacted directly by environmental change, why it's a local crisis as well as a global one. And then Sunday morning at 10 o'clock, which is the time where we'll have our festival services on the 1st and 7th day, shared with Temple Sinai. That's Sunday at 10. The links on the Passover website. And tomorrow morning, before our service, Rabbi Henry leads our morning study, countdown to Seder, peeking into the Haggadah. as always, feel free to come off of mute after services, and we can kibitz here, offer some additional questions. We can talk and start talking about climate and what we can do. Classrooms Without Borders this week, we sponsor How the Holocaust Came to TV on Thursday at 3 p.m. And very exciting, this Monday, before your Shalomogram comes out, so listen now, Walking the Omer with Rabbi Henry. This is a daily practice from 8 a.m. to 8:45-ish, starting this coming Monday, the first day of the Omer, all the way to Shavuot morning, May 17th, so far from now, 50 days later, meeting at the parking lot at South Braddock Ave, at Biddle Ave in Regent Square. Dogs are welcome. Toby will be there, rain or shine. You don't need to register ahead of time, but if you would like to sign up for any kind of emergency updates, please do check out rscpassover.org/Omer. Link will be in the chat. Hope to see you there. And while we don't have virtual Seder tomorrow night, we do have a beautiful video from Molly May introducing the Kiddush for Passover with the special Havdalah insert there as we go from Kodesh to Kodesh, holiness of Shabbat to holiness of Passover. There's the festival links, there's Haggadahs we found, there are recipes, virtual Seders from radical Jewish leaders around the states, and less radical ones too, if that's what you need, and poetry and so much more. And that's at rscpassover.org. Welcome Karen Breen to share a report from the board.
Thank you. So thank you so much to the worship team, to Rabbi Henry, to Molly May, Don McGahan, Olivia Tucker. Thank you so much for all the work you do to inspire us each week. I want to thank you in particular for bringing to us tonight Rabbi Shoshana Friedman. Rabbi, I want to thank you so much for the work that you're doing. I found it so inspiring to hear about Dayenu. I know I'm personally interested in the Dayenu circles, and look forward to the word spreading through the congregation. I also wanted to mention that the board of directors met last night, as we do monthly now, since there's a lot to talk about. And one of the topics that we talked about was how to open up ultimately for services to be together in person, and how we would like to do that carefully, how we would do that to ensure everyone's safety. And so we recognize how hard it is to be in our narrow spaces, and we want to make sure that we look at ways, whether it's outdoors, whether it's indoors. When it happens, I'm not sure, but I wanted you to know that we are on it. The security committee will be meeting next week. I've had conversations with our partners in our facilities, with other presidents of other congregations, and we're putting together the data and thinking about what is the responsible thing to do. So I just want to say that as spring is here, the days are longer, the tunnel that we've been in for so long, we can see the light at the end of it. And we want you to know that we're taking very seriously the concerns about being together, and at the same time, weighing that against everybody's safety and health. So with that, on behalf of the board, I'd like to wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom and a Chag Sameach. Thank you.
You'll pick this up fairly quickly. The tide is rising, and so are we. The tide is rising, and so are we. The tide is rising, and so are we. This is where we are called to be. This is where we are called to be. The task is mighty, the task is mighty, and so are we. The task is mighty, and so are we. The task is mighty, and so are we. This is where we are called to be. This is where we are called to be. The land is holy, and so are we. The land is holy, Hayam gover, anu govrim. Hayam gover, anu govrim. Hayam gover, anu govrim. Hinenu kan, anu tzoakim. That tzoakim is from the Seder, right? We cry out to God when we're stuck. Hinenu kan, anu tzoakim. Last verse in the Hebrew. Ha'olam muchan. Ha'olam muchan. Anu nechonim. Ha'olam muchan. Anu nechonim. Ha'olam muchan. Anu nechonim. Hinenu kan. Anu tzoakim. Hinenu kan. Anu tzoakim. The world is ready, and so are we. The world is ready, and so are we. This is where we are called to be. This is where we are called to be.
Kol hakavod, that was so beautiful. I would love to learn to sing that. We lift our cups for Kiddush. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu b'shabbat kodsho b'yava uvratzon hinchilanu zikaron lema'aseh v'reishit ki hu yom techila lemikra'ei kodesh zecher litziat mitzrayim ki banu v'acharta ve'otanu kidashta mikol ha'amim ve'shabbat kodshecha be'ahava uvratzon hinchaltanu Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh haShabbat.
Amen.
And the last challah for a while. I baked it ahead of time. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz.
Amen. We have a closing benediction, which is another reading from Rabbi Friedman's collection. And let me just say that on our walks, we'll be looking at some, for like just a couple of minutes, some of Rabbi Friedman's prayers, blessings. May God bless and keep in the ground the roots of old forests, the bulbs of next year's flowers and fossil fuels, hallowed resting places of trees that clapped their hands and creatures of the sea that sported in the morning of the shining face of God. May God lift up the light of a loving countenance upon you who care for this earth, for this time forth, and the children's forevermore. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May it be God's will. Shabbat Shalom.